Good. I think we'll continue. So this is now best of the best, and it's up to you. You want to comment?
Okay, so let's start. This is a paper that was elected as the best paper of session, the incidence of TLSS, transient light sensitivity syndrome following femtosecond LASIK and SMILE. So as we know, phobia may occur after femtosecond laser incision because of stromal myofibril or keratocyte activation. And it is treated with topical steroids, and first reported 2006. And here, only 11 papers so far, and only 4 of them report the incidence. So the question is how often it does occur. So here we see on the right, it is 1.3%, or even 0% in this last series. Next. So the aim of this study was to determine what is the incidence on the type of the procedure, comparing femtosecond laser either for myopia or for hyperopia, and depending on the age of the patient and the magnitude of correction, eye moderate to mild ametropia. So this is how it was constructed. First, they looked at altogether from 2 weeks to 6 months, and then divided it to 2 weeks to 8 weeks, which is what we know from the literature, and then from 6 weeks on. They look at 27,000 cases. They look at the patients that were treated with steroids for long-term and had-associated photophobia. So these are what they defined as confirmed TLSS, and comparing the SMILE, LASIK, myopic, and LASIK hyperopic. So we see on the right the numbers. It is lowest with the SMILE, more on the LASIK myopic, and highest with the hyperopia. Next, and this shows this graphically. So as for the time point, we'll see if we see them all. The lowest is with the SMILE, then more with the LASIK and myopic, and it's more in the early phases and less in the late phases, but it does occur also more than 6 months. Next. Okay, as for the refractive grouping, we see the LASIK is much more than the SMILE, LASIK hyperopic far more, but only with the LASIK group, it depends on whether it is a low, moderate, or high ametropia. As for the SMILE or the LASIK, it doesn't matter whether, the amount of ametropia. And grouping by age. Again, age does have some effect. We see on the right, we see it more with the elderly than with the younger ones. It does occur more often, more than 8 weeks, more than it was previously reported. So it may occur also between 8 weeks and 6 months. And next, can I have some more?
That's it.
That's it. Okay. So the bottom line, TLSS does occur after femto, more after most after hyperopic laser, less with the LASIK. It is age-dependent, and it may occur even many weeks after the treatment, actual treatment.
Any comments? So obviously the excimer laser is doing it, and not really the femtosecond laser, right?
Yeah, I wonder, are all these cases, did he report only on femtosecond LASIK?
Yes. These are all femtosecond LASIKs.
And hyperops, also femtosecond.
Myopic and hyperopic, yes. These two.
So he has a combination of femtosecond and...
Yes, and what he essentially sees in the hyperopic group, that even, because they have a longer, I think we didn't put in the slides now, they obviously have a longer excimer time, of exposure. They already saturate very early and have TLSS to that certain extent. The myops, obviously, if you take less away, so weak, low, moderate, and increased, you also have higher, longer excimer exposure times. And SMILE had very low numbers because they don't have excimer.
Since it occurs more with the hyperopic and more with the elderly, what should you tell the patient coming to do an hyperopic LASIK? Should you warm in more than...
Do we really believe that it's the cause is the excimer laser? Because what we saw, we saw like more than 10 years ago when we started with the new femtosecond laser, suddenly I had patients with the older femtosecond from another company, everything was all right. We started, and suddenly we saw patients coming in after 4 weeks. When they stopped, they dropped with transient light sensitivity syndrome. So what we did, we reduced the energy of the femto a bit, we widened the spot separation, and suddenly the problem was not completely gone, but we saw it much less.
But my understanding is in this study, the femtosecond laser used was always the same one. It's a more modern one. So it's not the first generation.
How significant is this syndrome in clinical life?
I
mean,
think
if it is 9%, 1 out of 10, and makes their life miserable.
Is it about the energy going into the eye? What we see, I don't know what your experience is, but we see in our practice now with younger patients where we do refractive lens exchange, that quite some have, when we stop the eye drops, have the same syndrome. And not femtosecond laser cataracts, as well normal phakios. So there might be, there is some subclinical inflammation apparently in the cornea.
It's interesting that it's interesting that they had this 9% in hyperopes. Then it's using hyperopia in femtosecond laser in a higher extent than we all. At least in Germany we are not allowed to do this. We have a limit. There's only 3 diopters. That's basically it. So we do less hyperopic LASIK surgery than we do myopic. And for me, this is it's an interesting finding. You see it, but I cannot really duplicate this in my patients long term. I don't see it. So.
So my thoughts were, I presume it's related to damage to the anterior nerve plexus. So in the SMILE, if you've got a deep cap of 160 microns, then you've got much better preservation of the anterior nerve plexus. I mean, my thoughts were it's higher in hyperopia just because of the ablation profile that, in myopia it's obviously flattening the center, therefore the more of the peripheral anterior nerve plexus is going to be maintained. So this to me, it looks all proportionate to how much damage it actually causes to the anterior nerve plexus. I think the other thing that's quite surprising as well was the overall incidence, and it wasn't so clear exactly how they defined it, because sometimes you can, if you said to a patient, are your eyes a bit light sensitive, then they might mistake sort of like a bit of dryness or something for light sensitivity, and obviously there can be differences in levels of dryness after different treatments.
It's retrospective, and what they did is they went through the notes and they looked for all those where they gave steroid in that time frame, and then they checked whether photophobia was somewhere in the chart, in the EMR, and then they defined that as TLSS, and obviously there may be some of those who don't have classical TLSS.
But I think it can be mixed up with symptoms quite easily for patients.
Because steroids can also treat dry eyes.
Oh, of course.
So it
that's
could
a
be
problem.
dry eye. Could be. Even because with hyperopia, the ablation pattern is in the periphery, so would you stimulate more the keratocytes when you have a donut-like pattern? And also with SMILE, there's a lot of manipulation in the central part of the cornea, so wouldn't that activate keratocytes also?
I think the other thing that would be quite interesting would be to look at sort of antidepressants and things, because sometimes there are drug factors and other factors that can be associated with symptoms and pathology like this. So it may be that antidepressants have some sort of effect on the corneal nerves that perhaps they could look at as well.
When you have dry eye, you need antidepressants.
We'll continue. So again, papers. This is a paper out of Lund, Sweden, about retinal detachment after cataract surgery. And they talk about the annual incidence of retinal detachment. That's in the literature, the incidence of 10.5 to 18.2 per 100,000. And after cataract surgery, we know that it tends to increase. And these are the sort of risk factors which are known out of the literature. And so what they did is they took the Swedish National Cataract Registry and took 2015 to 2017 and looked at retinal detachment surgeries, because as you know, Sweden has a very good register for what is being done in the health system. So altogether they had about nearly 60,000 cataract surgeries which they looked at, and of those they found 0.5%, so 300 retinal detachments. And if you look at the age, you can see the retinal detachment groups is younger, about 10 years younger than the all eyes and all the others, so the whole group. You can see that there is an overrepresentation of males with nearly 70%, otherwise males were 42% in the entire group. They were more myopic, which is not a surprise, 25.1 millimeters compared to 23.7 as average. And of course, there was a higher capsule rupture rate. We know capsule rupture during surgery it can induce retinal detachment, so it's 2% versus 0.7%. Here you can also see the time after cataract surgery when it happens. So there seems to be a small peak at about 1 to 2 years, and then it levels off down to lower numbers at about 5 to 6 years. But only the trial also was only 6 years long, so we don't know. There's maybe still some coming up. Here it's interesting, I think, to see the Kaplan-Meier curves, and what you can see is that in the top, the blue line is all eyes, so these 60,000 eyes, and there's obviously about 0.5%, so you can see a very slow, slow decrease, so meaning you get some retinal detachments. The brown line is the ones age 60 or below, and then the black line is age 60 and below and myopic with defined 25 millimeters and longer, and then the red line would be younger than 60, myopic with 25 millimeters, and male sex. And that's pretty significant already. So here we're talking at 4 or 5 years, nearly 10%, so 8% retinal detachment. So what they then discussed is that they had a look at the vision before cataract surgery of these 30% that had a vision. Actually, it turned out that of those which were under 60 and myopic, and they saw that 30% of them actually, before having surgery, had a visual acuity of 0.7 or better in the eye where they had retinal detachment. And in the other eye, the contralateral eye, actually had visual acuity of 0.8 to 1, so actually pretty good visual acuity. So what they're sort of discussing is, well, of course, we see again age, myopia, and sex. This is sort of being shown with this big registry study. We see that above 75 years old, essentially, there's a very low risk. And the question really is, that if you have a younger patient who's myopic and is a male, maybe even more so, shouldn't you be a little more conservative and not operate them if the other eye still has a visual acuity of 0.8 or 1 and this eye has maybe a visual acuity of 0.7 on average. So put that out on you, because that is obviously now informed consent, and that's decision making together with the patient. We're in the sort of also refractive lens exchange arena, although these were cataracts. So yeah, I'd like to hear what you say.
It clearly shows that when we educate our patients, you have to tell them, and the younger they are, the earlier they can potentially get it. You have to put it in your informed consent. I think it's a clear answer, also a clear indicator that we should not forget about phakic IOLs in these patients, because if you have a 50-year-old, why not do a phakic IOL and prolong it for another 10 to 15 years and go in this age range? Because retinal detachment is not a nice thing to have. Nobody wants to have it. So, I'm thinking about this as a good indicator, as a good argument to wait with refractive lens exchange, postpone it, and pull it later.
If they have a clear lens. These were
in a clear lens extraction, right. But the clear lens extraction would be the same. If you have a slight cataract with 50, then you cannot do anything else. But there is worldwide also tendency of performing refractive lens exchange early.
Right.
The same problem.
But what about another patient who comes to you who is 55 and has a cataract? It's not a strong cataract, but it's a cataract, no question. How do you go about it? Are you just do it now, or say, well, maybe we'll wait for a few years, as long as your vision is still okay, and the other eye actually has pretty good vision on average?
Yeah.
No, I think we have to think about sort of PVD status
That's
as
right.
well, which we haven't yet discussed.
Thank you very much.
The other thing we don't have is there's no sort of control group here, so we don't know what would happen. We don't know what the natural history is of these younger people if they didn't have their cataract surgery. Obviously, I assume it would be much less. But I think exactly as you said, the big implication is how transferable is this evidence from cataract to refractive lens exchange? Because, if it is, in all honesty, it means you should not be doing RLE on particularly patients like this. If you've got someone under 60, male, axial length, I think it's 25 or 26, and if you tell them there's a 4.5% chance of retinal detachment within 1 year, I presume absolutely no patient would want to go ahead. They would choose pretty much anything else.
Yeah. Concerning PVD status, of course, I have to point that out. We have an ESCRS running trial in 11 centers throughout Europe looking at PVD before surgery using OCT and also sometimes ultrasound. And then we're following them, and we're watching for over 5 years who's getting retinal detachments and also when they develop their PVD. So we don't have any results yet, unfortunately, but we'll have results, I believe, next year. We're going to have the first interim report, and then, of course, after another 3 years, the final report. So that will hopefully help us. We had more than 600 eyes, which we included in that trial, and it's an observational trial. But you wanted to say something, Guy?
No, I do agree. I do agree with Thomas that I think there's a huge place for ICL in patients coming from refractive surgery, myopic patients, especially now with newer ICLs where we also have diffractive ICL, the IPCL, which can help these patients as well for distances as for near, with a much lower incidence of retinal detachment, or quite the same incidence as normal situation. I do agree with Alex that I would look for PVD, because I think this is a major influence. I mean, in this study, did they found any difference between
No, this study is really a registry study. So they only looked cataract patients and who get retinal detachment, and they knew the axial length and age and stuff, but they didn't know PVD and status of that.
And what about hyperopes?
No, these were all, no. Well, it's a whole group, but obviously what they looked at, well, hyperopes, I am not sure. That wasn't actually pointed out in the paper. That wasn't part of the paper. So I can't tell you.
But in the case that you described, 55 patients with early cataract with some complaints, and there's no difference between 55 and 57 or 59 years. And then he will have these complaints upgoing. So if he has cataract and if it is clinical, then he should be operated, even though it's higher risk, but you can't avoid it.
Well, yeah, but they argued that you may want to defer, right? But they argued that you may want to defer it for whatever, as long as the patient, his symptoms are not
Well, what I'm saying
challenging.
is you can defer it for 2 years, but 55 and 57 is the same age group.
That may be true.
You cannot differentiate that much.
Definitely comes back to your point, Oliver. When you have somebody who is 56 and he's still okay, he has a little slight cataract, you should tell him the options and can you continue to go with this? It's not a bad thing. We may do it in a couple of years. I think it's our responsibility, clearly shown here. Yeah.
I completely agree. I think the issue is now there's this evidence, there's the Dayan paper from a few years ago, and they're all sort of showing exactly the same thing, that if you do cataract surgery in young people or younger people, particularly male myopes, then there's a much higher risk of retinal detachment. And I think the question is really, when is there enough evidence to say you should not be doing RLE in this patient group? And I must admit, to me, I think we're almost there. I mean, what do other people think? I mean, the implications are quite profound.
I think, Alex, we're still missing here the science on this. We don't know exactly. We also don't know if we have anything, in the, as you said, the posterior surface of the retina, actually, how is the vitreous? Do we have to retreat every single defect might be? Can we laser it? Can we do it then? I think that we don't have good data at the moment.
But how do you think, what do we need to do to get that data? I mean, obviously there's the SCRS.
Well, Oliver's doing one good study at the moment to determine or detect actually, how that works after surgery, what is the change to the vitreous. That's one thing. And the next study most likely will be, we have to randomize, a trial situation where we do pre-treat and we don't pre-treat. It's a big study because you need big numbers. These are numbers small. You see only 300 out of 60,000 cases. So in order to find evidence here, you need really a big group. So this is clearly also a study for a big registry. We need to combine efforts here.
Obviously, at this stage, our retinal specialists advise not to treat it, even if you see a small hole or so. Because I often ask them, when I see a patient, a young myopic patient who needs cataract surgery, see a small hole, should I treat it? No difference, apparently, according to the studies, according to what the retinal specialists say.
Well, I think prophylactic laser is very unclear whether it makes any sense. Of course, if the other eye had a retinal detachment history, that's a different issue, but that's hopefully not the case most of the time. So prophylactic laser is, there's no literature on it, no good literature on it, no evidence.
Does anyone has a clue why the male sex is at increased risk?
I presume it must be related to the PVD status, because in the early results that were presented, I mean, I probably got the numbers wrong, but I think a PVD was present in sort of 60% of females at baseline and 47% of males at baseline. So I'm guessing it's related to that. But I mean, just before I was going to say, I think the implications of this, we discussed, but I think there's a lot of implications here for informed consent as well. If we're not translating it yet to RLE and we don't know the differences between PVD present, yes or no, that we should really be mentioning this to every patient having cataract surgery instead of it just being 1 in 1,000 risk of some sort of serious complication. If it's 4.5%, if you're doing cataract surgery in a male under 60, these should be much higher up the consent form so people are aware. Yeah. And if they're aware, then maybe they will present much earlier, or perhaps people need to be screened more frequently or more regularly, or perhaps in more detail after the surgery, particularly if all the problems seem to occur in maybe the first year or two. There's got to be better ways of following these people up, perhaps to pick up problems early, if they are going to occur.
Good. I think we'll continue.
Okay, this is a study, it came from Boris Neiser from Israel, and that looked at 3 years follow-up of accelerated versus the standard cross-linking in pediatric groups. Next. Okay, as we know, keratoconus pediatric is aggressive, it's progressive, and early diagnosis is needed. So there are two options, either to use a standard, which is about 3 millijoules for 30 minutes, as compared to the accelerated, we just take 10 minutes, 1/3 of the energy, but 3 times the energy, but 1/3 of the time. We know it is safe, we know it is efficient, but the numbers are small, and the follow-up is up to 3 years. Next. So the purpose was to compare the topographic results of standard versus accelerated cross-linking. Next. And they had 54 eyes with the standard, 3 milliwatts for 30 minutes as compared to 39, 9 milliwatts for 10 minutes. The groups were quite equivalent. Next. And these are the results. And as we can see, there is a significant improvement in both uncorrected and best-corrected visual acuity in the two groups, and the lines are going in parallel. Next. And also the K-max change and the K-mean changes are also going in parallel, so it actually creates the same effect. Next. Looking at the regression, there is some difference, but minor different, and as for stabilization, it's the same number, 88 and 89% of both groups. Next. Again, this is in numbers. There is no difference. There is some significant improvement in vision, but there is no difference between the two groups. Looking at accelerated, it was non-inferior to standard in terms of best corrected, uncorrected, thinner pachymetry, and astigmatism. And next. So the bottom line is both protocols show improvement in vision. They both stabilize in the same way, around 98%. The accelerated was non-inferior, at least, to the standard one. So this accelerated protocol can be beneficial, especially for this pediatric group, and it may provide an easier and safer therapy.
Yeah, that's good. We basically have changed to accelerated protocol for all cross-linking.
Is there any reason why not use only accelerated? If the results are the same, it's easier to take 1/3 of the time.
It's easier. It's much straightforward. It's shorter. It's more beneficial for the patient. If it doesn't show a difference, which obviously is shown here, then I think we're on the right track. This can be a long, because if you have young patients, very often we have like 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds, we do them under topical. It's not so easy to keep them there, You cannot do everybody in general anesthesia, and to keep them there one day, a whole hour.
They want to look into the mobile phone.
Yeah, well, they can.
Social media.
Social media, you can do something, but I have to tell young patients, particularly in this age range, we're not talking about pediatric, too young, but this range is not so, this age range is not so easy to treat if you don't want to do general anesthesia in all these cases, which is a big hassle.
Does it affect the way that you do general anesthesia? If you do it for 10 minutes or for 30 minutes, you can just use laryngeal mask or so.
Well, now we go into the discussion. I think, in a major, or let's say in a big hospital, personnel for anesthesia is quite difficult to get at the moment with COVID, at least in our country. We have really problems. So we're reducing anything what we can for general anesthesia and moving to, sedation or, anything what we can do in topical, because we just don't get enough personnel. So I'm not interested in doing too much general anesthesia.
None of us.
And just a note on the accelerated protocol, because when we talk about accelerated, it can mean a lot of things. So here the accelerated was only 9 milliwatts, because you also have accelerated with 30 milliwatts for 3 minutes, and it's not everything is the same. So here it's not that fast, so it's like this should be around 16 minutes, more or less, or 12.
Indeed, that's great. Yep. I think there are a lot of studies, and we are still doing the standard protocol, because a lot of studies show the evidence of accelerated, but then again, it's difficult to compare, because some studies do with extra oxygen, some studies do, like you say, 9 milliwatt, 30 milliwatt for 3 minutes, or 9 milliwatt for 10 minutes, and so that's a big difference. So if you have patients with thin corneas, it's something else, and we also do accelerated.
No, I was going to say, I think it's all very good, but I think you also need to think of quality of evidence as well. So I'm assuming that this was this was not a randomized controlled trial. So I think really what it does is it shows that there may be some potential that needs looking into.
Yeah.
But I think people should not be sort of just jumping and changing practice based upon something like this. You need to think, this should be the use for a basis for a proper randomized controlled trial or a series of randomized controlled trials to see if the results are reproducible. And I think the other thing is you need to think about standardized outcome measures as well. And I think that's very important, not just for things like this, but for cataract surgery and the laser, that there needs to be standardized reporting of outcome parameters so results can easily be compared between studies.
But Alex, I turn it around. When Theo Seiler and Sperl were producing, actually, inventing this, they also didn't know that this was the right measurement in terms of, the amount of, energy and they put in. I mean, they did some experimental studies. They came up with this protocol. Now we see something different, so we also don't know if this,
I completely agree. I mean, I think the key is what is the right answer, but I think to have a definitive answer, you need high-quality evidence like an RCT to know for sure.
Any advantage of the standard technique?
I don't
Do you see any potential advantage of the standard technique, 30 minutes?
It may be more effective.
Well, if it's more
Yeah, but
effective.
it's not randomized controlled. You have to watch out. It's a little. It's not the strongest evidence.
And you usually see deeper demarcation lines with the classic
Okay,
protocol,
that's-
although
that's-
you don't know if it means that
That's something else.
there's a larger improvement.
Correct.
And also we have
Low-
to see if it was continuous or pulsed UVI light, because it can
Continuous
be.
files or accelerated,
There are-
but low evidence, but at least a hint.
No, I completely agree, exactly.
Okay, I think we'll continue because we're sort of running out of time. Here again, this is a paper actually out of Vienna from Schadmüller. And it's two papers which are actually behind, right after each other. One about rotational stability and one about decentration and tilt. And they talk about CTRs, potentially helping, for reduced IOL rotation, less tilt. These are all ideas which were sort of floating around. And what they did is they did a randomized controlled trial, bilateral, one eye with the other. So they have one eye with a plate haptic IOL with a capsular tension ring. The other eye is the same plate haptic IOL without a capsular tension ring, same surgeon. So very clean design. These are so it's a Zeiss plate haptic lens, and then it's the off-deck ring. And so I had 130 eyes of 65 patients, so also quite a large study. And they also did IOL implantation in different meridia, and did follow-ups 1 week, 1 month, and 6 months. And they used the Cassia anterior segment OCT to evaluate both decentration and tilt values, and they also obviously looked at rotational stability. So this is a rotation now from at the end of surgery, so a last photograph on the operating microscope, to 1 hour, because we know the rotations tend to happen very early on. And you can see a few outliers in the non-CTR group. You can see it on the right side, about more than 5 degrees, 7%, and but not significant. Then rotation from 1 hour to 1 week, you can see one big outlier in the CTR group, but also some in the non-CTR group. And then this is 1 week to 1 month. So there's less rotation in that perspective, and this is 1 month to 6 months. And then actually there's very little rotation thereafter, as you would expect, because typically this will happen in the first few months. So this is the absolute rotation from at the end of surgery to 6 months. And you can see there's actually no difference. And there is a slightly higher degree of outliers in the non-CTR group, so it's just the IOL. No correlation with axial length, no correlation with lens thickness, no correlation with lens equatorial diameter as measured with OCT. So here you can see the way they also measured decentration and tilt. You can see an example before surgery, shortly after surgery, and here a little longer, and you can see the lens is decentered and slightly tilted. So they looked at lens decentration and tilt at 6 months, nearly significant, but not quite. Interestingly, a little more decentration in the CTR group. And now if you look at this pre-up to 6 months, interesting here, I'll show you here, the lens tilt at 6 months, that's the actual lens tilt. You can see there's quite a bit of scatter here, so you have more lens tilt and significantly more in the CTR group. And this is the change from 1 week to 6 months. You can see a lot of outliers in the CTR group. Here an example, you can see on the left side, the tilt after 1 week is little, and then it's much more at 6 months, and this patient actually has induced astigmatism because of that, with 3 diopters compared to 1 diopter at 1 week. and the contralateral eye is fine. So what they find essentially is the CTR shows no difference in the mean absolute rotation of this plate haptic IOL. They showed a significantly lower proportion of outliers in the CTR group. They had a decrease in rotation within the first postoperative hour with the CTR, but on the other hand also had a negative impact on decentration and tilt when using such a capsular tension ring with a plate haptic IOL. So I'd be interested because we've always talked about this topic. The CTR. Obviously this is now with the plate haptic IOL. We don't know how that translates into open loop, single piece IOLs, which are also toric. But this has been out there. Now we have a pretty clean trial. Well done, randomized, controlled, intra-individual comparison. Using a very high resolution OCT. So I'd like to know what you'll take home from that.
Well, I think that this last sentence is very important because at the end of the day, it's only the long-term effect which I think is really interesting. I mean, this early phases might be significant low proportion of outliers. Okay, good. But if the CTR has a negative effect on decentration and tilt in plate haptic IOLs, then I think it's not justified. It's just not justified. And we hear it on many, many occasions, on many congresses, that the best way is to put a CTR in a plate haptic IOL design.
But why does it happen? Any ideas why, if you put a CTR in, you get that effect?
Maybe because of stress on the zonulum?
I'm really surprised because if you would ask me this before, I would just ask the inverse. I would say you have less decentration because you expand the capsular bag, so the IOL can much easily more rotate in the first hour. On the long term, with the capsular tension, you expect less fibrosis, so less tilt and decentration.
See, we had a very interesting study where we looked at our decentered capsular bags. I sent a large portion of 50 cases to Liliana Werner, and we looked at the incidence. So what we found is high proportion of pseudoexfoliation syndrome of decentered capsular bags. I mean, we talked about the dead length syndrome, but also we found a lot of cases with CTRs.
Right, but on the other hand, you put CTRs into pseudoexfoliation syndrome eyes. We did that at least. Now we don't do that much anymore, but we used to do that because we thought we were doing something really good.
Right, but also in the group which has no pseudoexfoliation. Okay. So there were also 30%, almost like 40% out, not with pseudoexfoliation. So it's not clear.
Alex.
I must say that it's no surprise to me. Because, not at all, because what happens when you put a CTR in the capsule, you stretch it up. So there is more space for the lens to rotate, to decenter, to tilt, and so on. And then on one side, it can be on top of the ring, and then on the other side.
But the ring is very thin.
So, I know, still. I mean, the tilt is
but the
small.
is also
well, it's 0.1 millimeters, and that tilt
so
is...
I don't see any logic in putting a CTR in such eyes. It doesn't do anything good, and I'm happy that we have such a study just to show it. The same with pseudoexfoliation. All of us put CTRs in pseudoexfoliation. Doesn't make any sense. It doesn't help. Actually, it makes it even worse. So, in most cases, we don't need.
So we don't need CTRs anymore.
Oh, we need just for the right cases, not for this.
No, I was going to say, I think it's very interesting because it's a randomized controlled trial, so you expect very good evidence, but a lot of the results or the findings seem to be influenced perhaps by outliers, and therefore if there's something that's perhaps different to expect in clinical practice, the key thing is, this is great and it's very interesting, but perhaps it should be used to power a much more definitive RCT from multiple different centers to try and find to see if this finding is reproducible.
I mean, for me, this study has one important aspect, and I've always had that in my gut feeling, but now it tells me again, I don't like plate haptic lenses. I'm sorry. I didn't like them from a PCO perspective. I know that this lens rotates. It's not dramatic, but it does, and we've had quite a few repositions with this lens. And obviously, not even centration and tilt is really good, no matter with CTR or not. So I think I've really gone only to open loop toric lenses of different manufacturers. So I'm not married with anybody. I mean, I am married with somebody, but not with any company. That's what I mean.
Ollie, can you go back one slide?
Yeah.
Just the number of decentration.
Well, no, that's a lot of slides back. No, I think. Let me go.
It doesn't say, right?
No, it doesn't say the number, but it just says the values here.
Okay.
But it's not so little. So these are rotations. Sorry. Yeah. That's 6 months. Yeah, I mean, that's average, right? But there's few outliers. You can see them on the left.
Lens decentration. Okay.
It's not major.
I suppose the other thing
But
is
this 5 degrees, that's high. 5 degrees is high tilt. That's high.
Well, we have physiologically, we have about 4 degrees. That's
I suppose the other thing is, they've got something that's measurable, but does it translate through to a problem clinically as well?
Well, the one patient definitely did.
Well, you saw that.
Diopters with stigmatism.
17.
Yeah. That patient's not happy. They have to do something. Yeah. So plate haptic is there to stay? Does it have any pros? Is there anything actually that speaks in favor of a plate haptic?
Yes, because they are very stable.
Stable where?
If you put a quadrangle within a circle, you have 4 points of fixation. So as for rotational, they are very stable.
But
so
we know,
that's the only reason.
But we know from the open loop, toric lenses which are out there, the hydrophobic acrylic, rotations of 1.6, 2 degrees. When you really measure from at the end of surgery to 6 months or to 3 months, I mean, there's essentially no rotation with these lenses anymore.
Could it be that the decentration of tilt you have with CTR is due to placing the CTR that you induce some kind of sonular weakness? Because we all know putting a CTR stretches the capsular back on one side, and then I'm just thinking.
Speculate, and maybe we try to explain, but I want to follow up from Oliver. My gut feeling is the same with plate haptic designs, and what I also don't like is basically you see long-term, ovalization of the capsular bag in these lenses usually. And that causes also this. I mean, if you look at 1 year, 2 years later, and you see them at the slip dilated pupil, so you see really ovalization of the anterior capsulorhexis. And more decentration, I think, overall. But we shouldn't kill our plate haptic designs today. But it's a good study.
Yeah. Good. Now a different topic. Something Ehud brought up.
We had a pre-meeting day, and this was an innovation. I think this was for the first time, so maybe before we go to the details, you tell us, Oliver, what is innovation and what is new with this and this meeting, the ESRS meetings?
Well, the ESRS meeting itself, well, I think many of you know, you've seen it, the bottle there. Alex has our bottle. We obviously tried to reduce carbon emissions in this building as much as we could, and many of you, I think 6,700 of you, have offsetted your travel when you registered. So we have a company who accompanied us. They are specialized in sustainability of congresses, so with including travel, hotels. There are certain indices we know about those, and everything which is happening in this building, electricity, waste, and so forth. And you may have noticed there's also little meat here. We have very little meat.
My question was about the Innovation Day.
Sorry. I thought you were.
We will talk about sustainability.
Yeah, the Innovation Day was a little warm for those of you who were there because the air conditioning didn't work properly, and everybody thought it was just because of sustainability, but actually wasn't. It was a technical issue. But the Innovation Day, that was on Friday, and the Innovation Day is a new format which we've created, and essentially what it does is it brings doctors, and nearly half of them, 47% were doctors, and then industry together. And we had a nice share of large industry and also startups and smaller industry, and then we had some finance people. And that was the group, and we had 370 people in that room. And we discussed some, very sort of, like say, hot topics, presbyopic correcting and so forth. And one of them was this. And so the idea is really to understand what are the trends of the next few years, what are the difficulties that industry is facing, that we are facing. I think very interesting new format, quite different to what we speak, at ESCRS.
Okay, so session number 7 was about sustainability,
yes,
which was a big thing. As you see, the format was that there was all line of people, doctors and from the industry. It says David Chang, but this is not David Chang here. Next,
no,
please.
he looks
this
better.
is David Chang.
That's the
and David Chang gave an excellent talk about his experience in the Aravind. And they had a big study that was published, a few 100,000 of cases operated, and they actually re-sterilized everything from glove, gown, needles. They just re-sterilized everything. And can you go one back, please? Okay, and this was the result. If you compare the endophthalmitis rate in the Aravind and these circumstances, then the rate of the endophthalmitis was 0.04. And this is compared to the American Academy Iris Registry, which is exactly the same. But they use only disposables. And as for the carbon footprint, in the US and UK, it is 20 times higher than the our variant, even though they are using all reusables and versus all disposables next. And if you ask the surgeon in this survey, what would you like the manufacturer to do? To recycle or packaging or to have a less carbon footprint, then over 90% say yes. And if should we have reusables in the supplies, then again, over 90% prefer yes to have reusables next. And there are actually now a website which is dedicated to sustainability and ophthalmology next, and this is next please. And this is isustain.org. So it is kind of being more organized, and as Oliver said, this is going to be a big issue in the next few years next. And then we heard from what is the approach of the manufacturers. Thomas Bossel from Oakley discussed it next. So they also agree that the companies, the manufacturers, to be more aware of this sustainability and looking how we create products which have less material and more recycling and more using of disposable and so on next. And then we'll look at it in a kind of a more comprehensive look in terms of regulation, usability, cost pressure, and the performance. On the other hand, we had from the companies the other aspects of having reusable versus disposable. For example, if the manufacturer provides a disposable, then he is responsible for the sterility. If we do reusables, then it is the responsibility of the doctors and the staff. So this is another way to look at the disposable versus reusable. And as we know, now this sustainability became a big issue. And thank you, Oliver. So,
any short comments? Short comments on that. So what do you take home from these? You know, you've heard this also. There was David Chang also gave a talk on one of the symposia on Sunday on sustainability. There was a course on sustainability, and there's a lot of information coming in at the moment. So what's your take on that? What do you take home for yourselves for tomorrow? How are you going to change your practice?
Well, I'm going to change my practice. Well, I heard, for example, with little steps, step by step, like using diamond knives, where you don't need any disposable knives anymore. Also the gowns that the patients wear when they enter the DOR, it's not necessary, in fact, apparently. So, and this are very little things. I think we also should look into our practices, and that's what something we stress in our practice, that like, often when I leave the office on Friday night as the last one, I see lights being on, airco being on, so we try to motivate also our staff just to take care of that. That's not the OR, but I mean, these are all little things.
Alex?
No, I mean, I completely agree with some of the examples you said. I think I mean, ultimately, it all sort of boils down to sort of optimizing the procedure, using the minimum amount of instruments necessary. Can you reuse the instruments? If there's an instrument on, the set that you never use, why is it coming back each and every single week? All these things have to be cleaned. And I think the other thing, exactly as we've discussed with gowns and things, what is evidence-based and what is just like eminence or like historical, that we've just always done it that way and we've never really questioned about why. So I think we need to sort of work out how to reduce consumption but also maintain quality at the same time. So I think it's about sort of trying to find an evidence base about what truly is needed and removing all the evidence-based stuff, which obviously we don't need.
Thomas?
Well, obviously we work together on this topic, Oliver. I think, personally I've already started, for me, and I agree with you, small steps, not taking my car to work. I'm taking the train, every day, because it's anyhow there, so just steps. But what I take away from this Congress is, as we're sitting here, we have a lot of still representatives from national societies. I hope that this is a good example, this Congress is a good example of what we can do in ophthalmology. I mean, we obviously have to do it globally, it's not only ophthalmology, but we can do something. Societies can go home, or representatives can go home And we have demonstrated almost, a Congress which has no emission, zero, close to. So we should duplicate this. We should do it in Germany, everywhere, in all the other countries. It's a good start, or it's a necessary start. So I'm just very happy that we are there, and we need to push every day now.
Andrea?
And even outside of the operating room, there are things that we can change. For example, discarding the bottles after only a few days of use, or even 1 month. There was recently a paper arguing that there is really no rationale for throwing out drops that are still full just because there was 1 month after opening, so all those things. And even in the National Society meetings, we should try to copy some of the things that the NCRS did this year. For example, the absence of bags. We have lots of bags from lots of, of meetings. We really don't need them, so it was very good. Yeah. And we can do that at home.
Well, it's not only what we think and what is our approach, because this is regulations. And we need to realize that there's absolute no proof that disposables are safer than reusables. And there is no sense in using them, having like a disposable hook. I mean, this is a piece of metal connected to a piece of plastic. Why should it be re-sterilized? And we use tons of plastics. We can use 1 cassette for 5 cases, and there is no medical or any scientific sense in replacing them every surgery. So, but the regulation forces us to do it. So we should force, the regulators to change it. Otherwise, we may think we can use more and more disposables, but we can't, in fact, because this is what is forced on us. So there's still a long way to go, but we need to do that, and we must use more and more reusables than disposables.
I mean, I can just tell you that we've obviously put a lot of effort into this. So actually, what we've looked at in Austria is the packs, the CAT packs. And then we saw that there were huge differences, especially in drape size. So some, for cataract surgery, have drapes that go down to the feet. And then what we did is we analyzed if all Austrian centers, the 32 altogether, if they were all to use the average of the smallest third, so which obviously works for many surgeons in Austria, for many centers, then we would reduce carbon emissions by 32%, like this. And I think many have these big packages because they just always had them, and they never, they always work, but they never thought about, actually, do I need such a huge drape? Do I need this extra drape? Do I need such a long gown, which is quite heavy? So I think there's a lot of rethinking on our side, and what we're going to try to do is develop a European ESCRS sustainability CAT pack, where we say this is something where most ESCRS members actually do quite well with it. It seems to work very well. And then everybody else who has a larger one has to think about it, whether he or she can't also reduce to a smaller size.
Well, the question is, can you re-sterilize a surgical knife? Can you do that?
Well, no, this is just CAT packs. This is just disposables, but reducing the disposables is also something which is important.
Okay, I'm not
right.
asking about if you
and the
want
next
to
step is a much more complicated one, because that's when you have to go to the regulators. And so we actually had a workshop yesterday with industry of us, ESCRS, and also iSustain, the ESCRS colleagues and AAO colleagues. And what we're going to try to do is also we have some contacts to Brussels. And what we're going to try to do is show, and we have to create some evidence. That's the problem. We have to at least or guidelines, and then hopefully, if it's not just a manufacturer going to Brussels and saying, MDR is a problem, for example, the new regulation for medicinal devices, but also if it's us as a society that goes up, then we probably have a little more. They have a little more ear to listen to what we're saying than they do for manufacturer 1 or 2 or for doctor 1 and 2. So, but it's going to be a process which is tedious, I can tell you that. This is not going to happen next year. This will take a much longer time.
And it's more complicated because then surgeons should be responsible for what they are doing. It's easiest to take disposables.
Of course.
But if you clean them, now it's your responsibility to do that. Many would prefer to have the more expensive solution.
Absolutely, but on the other hand, the ASCRS has shown, so 5 societies in the US, AAO, ASCRS, and others, have come up with a white paper, which was in Journal of Cataract and Refractive Surgery, just is coming out now. And essentially what it tells you is a reuse of bottles, meaning of the drops which we used before cataract surgery, dilating drops, for example, or topical anesthetic drops.
For the whole day.
In the US, I think I understand about half of them, they take the bottle, take the 1 drop for the patient, and they have to throw the bottle away, and for the next patient they have to open a new bottle. which makes no sense as long as you haven't come into contact with the lids, right? So if you keep the hygienic rules, and we've always done it, we've always used the bottle until it was empty, and then we'd open a new bottle, right? So I think that alone, and we know that these bottles, there's a lot of carbon footprint in those because there's a whole production process in pharmaceuticals which, has a huge carbon footprint. So I think, and that was a guideline which they just now brought out, and now every American center can say, it says here. So, I think these things can change. It takes a while.
I do think this makes sense, the reusable of bottles. The problem we have in private practice, you can implement this quite easily. But in hospitals, with the waves of accreditation and GCI standards, it's quite difficult because they try to do just the inverse, I have the impression.
Right, but if you show them a guideline and you go to your hygienic specialist of your hospital, you maybe have a chance.
And that's why we need to support like ESCRS national societies.
Yeah, but you can do it in hospitals. We do it since basically 10 years. We never used the bottle, like you said.
Yeah, but I think that the survey showed that also about a third of Europeans also have to dispose the bottle.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think we need to think of some sort of easy benchmarking metric so you can sort of compare between manufacturers. Maybe what is the percentage of packaging product that's not recyclable, or if this contains like 10 phaco tips or something, and that weighs like 100 grams, why is there 900 grams of packaging or something? I think we need to find ways of being able to easily compare between manufacturers. Otherwise, I'm sure there's going to be, someone's going to say they're much more sustainable, but maybe that product is made in New Zealand when it's compared to someone else's product that's made in France or something. We need to find ways of comparing apples with apples rather than apples with oranges.
Thank you for saying that. It's like as if it was prep, but we didn't prep them. So actually the workshop yesterday was about developing a sustainability index for cat packs and for cassettes and tubing for all disposable in cataract surgery. So our aim as ESCRS is to have that sustainability index ready for the next meeting in Vienna next year, so that you can then, if you do a tender for cat packs, for example, then you can say, like always, quality is important, price is important, but now we're going to have a sustainability factor, which may be whatever your hospital wants it to be, 20%, 30%, whatever, and you will have a sustainability index, which they have to fill in, the companies have to fill in, and it's not only about the company, but actually what they're using, the supply chain, where do those things come from, where the raw materials come from, and what kind of carbon footprint is behind that. And at the end, you get a number between 0 and 100, and the most sustainable ones may have a higher chance of winning the tender. And that will change competition. And now the companies will have to think very proactively because they want to stay in business. So I think we're doing this. So this is being done actually right now. We had the kickoff yesterday. And we'll see. I hope that we'll have that ready for you next summer. And I think that will also help you to benchmark and to see where, where's my cat pack compared to, let me say, maybe the best sustainability cat pack in Europe or whatever it may be. We ran out of time.
Mm-hmm. No posters?
We have to miss out on the posters, but you have everything online, ESCRS on demand, everything at your fingertips. So no reason not to click in there and have a look. Everything you missed. Thank you very much for the discussion, for the very lively discussion. Thank you, Ehud, for helping with the slides. You did a lot of work there, selecting. And I can only say we're going to meet the next time in Villamoura at the winter meeting. And for those who can't make it to Villamoura, that's going to be actually in March this time, not February, but it's going to be second weekend in March, so please check the dates. And for all those who can't make it there, I would love to see you in Vienna next year. It's, I think, 8th or 9th of September, so 1 weekend earlier in Vienna. I think we're going to have a very good time there. I think it's going to be a very exciting congress, maybe even better than this one, although this one was already very good. We're essentially back to pre-COVID, so as if COVID hadn't existed, which is nice. I hope this autumn will also be a healthy autumn for us all, and I wish you very safe travels back home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.